Exposer of all things woke.
These damn people have made racism like really embarrassing and cringe. Tucker Carlson came out and said that he would consider voting for Elizabeth Warren.
Popped, done goes the weasel.
Milton Friedman.
Welcome back to
Mommy's house.
All right, with us today is writer, podcaster, commentator, troublemaker, and exposer of all things woke, James Lindsay. Welcome to Mommy's house.
That's me, thanks.
Okay, well, we've come a long way. How woke being once upon a time a badge of honor for some and now a total slur.
Yeah, it's a slur. It's a funny word, the history of it. A lot of people, don't know the history. I'll talk like Trump for a minute. A lot of people don't know it. It's
Great
history, long history. It goes back. They used to call it hip back in the day. Actually, they did. So in the 60s, it was like the word that was used was hip. And it was like being hip to the power structure, hip to the way the man was manipulating the situation, using racism to keep the, black guy down or whatever. And then it kind of started to become woke in the early 2010s because Erykah Badu put out a song, Master Teacher, talking about the same stuff. And then it's like Master Teacher has like this refrain. It's like, stay woke, stay woke. It's like whispering, stay woke in between the choral lines. And so then Trayvon Martin gets shot in Sanford, Florida in 2013, and they start saying, stay woke, stay woke, stay woke. That's the birth of, from what I understand, and I don't know the full details of this, an organic Black Lives Matter movement that was very quickly turned into a hashtag campaign by the trained Marxists that we have come to know and love in Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors, et cetera. And it started to build from there. But nobody really – I looked back through my Twitter history, and I very, very rarely used the word woke before 2019. I must have been using it by the end of 2019. And by the middle of 2020, after St. George Floyd, power be upon him, died, we all had to use that word. And the left loved it, though. They were woke, and then we were like, you're woke. And they were like, don't call us woke. And there was this huge flurry for them to get woke off of them, which now in 2025 is repeating itself because last year we were like, hey, there's these elements on the right. They act exactly like these woke dudes on the left. Like there's the Groypers act like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, but it's like White Lives Matter. And then you've got like these anti-Semites. You got all these other people out there just going bonkers, identity politics and the whole thing, cancel culture, everything nasty, swarms online. If you live through
amok.
so we said they're woke.
Yes.
And they're like, that's a bad word. Get that off of us.
So let's bring it to the here and now because it's just all moved so fast. You have the woke left bubble bursts. 2024, purse popped, done goes the weasel. But now in victory, Douglas Murray talks about what do you do with your victory? The flare goes up and all of a sudden you see who's around, right?
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about if you look at the branch of sort of conservatism, right, and the fracture that's happening on one side, especially in Podcastistan.
Yeah.
Is that how we constantly call it?
Podcastistan?
Yeah, Podcastistan.
Is that where you live here in this house?
Exactly.
We're trying to get
you see sort of on one side, it's funny, all new media, but sort of legacy conservatism in new media, conservatism in new media, and then sort of what we would call woke right. On one side, you got, your Constantines, Ben Shapiro's, Seth Dillon, Babylon Bee, people speaking out, trying to call out the excesses that are starting to happen on this side, which is anyone from, your Jake Shields, just vicious anti-Semites, and then sort of adjacent folks who will sort of engage with them all the way down through Tucker Carlson's and Ian Carroll's and people like that. And on this podcast, we're going to name names. I mean, we'll name names. Is that okay?
No, Jordan said no, actually.
No, we're not going to do that. But then you have all that category happening. Can you just talk a little bit about this division that's happening and who the players are and where things stand right now?
Yeah, MAGA has always been kind of this multifaceted movement. So we'll go back to, I walked by the Trump Tower. I took a picture today, and it brings back memories.
You were spying.
I was spying. I was going in for a secret meeting. That's what the internet needs to believe anyway. So, MAGA has always been kind of this weird conglomerate movement. At first, in 2015 and 16, when Trump started talking about running the first time, like a lot of the establishment Republicans didn't like it. So you had like even the Daily Wire set wasn't very like in with this. So you have this kind of establishment, and then the Daily Wire is like alt establishment, conservative media, and they didn't like that. And then you had this kind of Tea Party kind of wild gun
Milo and the gang.
Yeah, you had this whole thing happening that we're like, no, yeah, Milo called him Daddy.
We called him Daddy.
That's
Yeah.
right, Daddy Trump. And the whole thing kind of like over there, and you had this alt-right phenomenon that Milo was kind of like touching but wouldn't quite commit to at the time, and now he's all the way over there in like their heroin dumpster or whatever. But these guys kind of were the first early adopters behind Trump, and then the Republican Party started to get behind him, and then it got very exciting in 2016, and then kind of everybody was sort of, behind him except J.D. Vance, and then and Tucker Carlson, actually.
We're making friends today.
Yeah, and so then what I'm saying is that it's always been this kind of like weird coalition that has included the thing that called itself, starting in 14 and 15, the alt-right.
So there's a dysfunctional family element going on in this space of like
we got to beat
the fighting.
Yeah, Democrats got to beat. We got to beat the Democrats somehow. So we need a coalition. And at first, the alt-right was really poorly behaved, and I think they were poorly behaved up until the Charlottesville "very fine people" moment. At which point they mostly started to behave and went kind of underground and started to become very mainstream MAGA, except the Groypers stayed radical and kind of nuts. But they were deeply embedded in kind of MAGA land then. And so from 17 or so, 18, whenever your Charlottesville was, that all started, it's all just kind of like gone forward. Then the J6 kind of thing happened. Biden gets put in the White House. Everybody kind of was walking together, and it was like, we're going to stop the woke, meaning the woke left. But these guys were always still along for the ride. Right, and they were still kind of radical, and there was this weird youth culture in MAGA that was, they call themselves based, which would be cool if it was based in reality, based in principle. But it's like, what it actually means is you said something you're not supposed to say, and you aren't afraid if you got in trouble. So it's
naughty,
like
and brave, and ballsy.
Well, the left calls it transgressive, right? Queer, actually, is queer. It's right wing queer is what it is when you're doing it. I'm not joking. Like we can do another hour on queer theory.
It's the Jews. Yeah,
yeah. It is literally like, how do you push the boundary, push the boundary, push the boundary? Anything that tells you that's too far is not okay. That's literally queer theory in its definition. Well, it's the same thing. Wow. So we're going to be a little bit more anti-Jew. We're going to be a little bit more white supremacist. We're going to be a little bit, more patriarchal. Next thing you know, you got whatever Andrew Tate is. Right? He's like the pinnacle right-wing drag queen queer character in this motif of based queerness.
Where have you seen them called? Where have you seen like Andrew Tate called queer?
Never. No. I'm making a parallel.
Yeah,
they are not.
They don't actually call them.
Well, I mean, we could.
It's the equivalent of the queer on the left.
No, I understand that. Yeah, but no one calls them the queer.
No, nobody. Okay. Yeah, no.
Straight pride parade coming out.
It's the energy. It's the same energy, right? It's break the rule, break the rule, break the rule, break the rule.
Right.
And sooner or later, just like with the drag queens literally marching down the street, we're all going to be like, that's cringe as hell. In fact, I'm even hearing from some of the Gen Zs right now that are super like right wing, and they're like, these damn people have made racism like really embarrassing and cringe. They're like, it was fun and now it's cringe. It's
right.
Like,
well, I think the whole thing is a response to excess woke leftism that has been dominating the culture for so long. And so it's fun to joke about racism, and it's fun to like be naughty with language and words when it's not a real thing and you don't mean it.
That's right.
Then when they start to mean it, it's not funny
it's like,
anymore.
Oh crap, you just hate Mexicans, right? And it's like, yeah.
It's like,
Jews,
oh bro, I was kidding. I wasn't.
Yeah.
It's like, well, now we have a problem.
Now it's weird.
And it's true. It's less fun to joke even about race stuff because in a society that's actually racist.
So you have all that going on, and then you got most of the Republican Party that's not like the Bulwark and the Lincoln Project, speaking of queer. Most of them got on board with Trump pretty hard, right? Like MAGA got establishment. Like there's a MAGA establishment, and then this like the cool kids, the elite club of like the influencers and all of that is this mishmash of those kind of like edgy characters, and then these embedded all right guys that never went away. Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovich, never went away. Radical as hell. And so in the last couple of years, they started just turning up the temperature. Jack started celebrating Franco Friday. I don't even know what Mike Cernovich does on a regular basis. It's very confusing to me. The man does not appear to have got it completely locked down.
Confusion is a part of it.
Well, sure.
Did this coincide with Elon buying X also?
Well,
and having the platform
there's
now?
a lot to that. Yeah, Elon bought X, and all of a sudden, Andrew Torba brought his minions over from Gab turned the place into a toilet. The Groypers went bananas now that it's almost impossible to ban them, turned the place into a toilet. And it's all got another factor that's even more complicated. I don't know where this all fits in, but there's a hilarious irony in it, is that the third world is now online. It's not America online, you've got mail anymore. It's like literally third world online. And so, one of the funny
What do you mean by that?
I mean, that literally 1 billion people who live in the third world are now on the internet.
And how do they contribute to this?
They're not exactly, let's say, racially dignified, respectful. They're highly racist people. So it's really funny that like Jake Shields is going to come out and say some racist nonsense, and he's going to talk about how much he hates some other country or whatever, and most of his fans are some third worlders that are running bot farms and crap trying to game the system. It's really got this weird irony to it, but I'm getting off the track. The point is that there was these alt-right guys, and then there's this weird cult of like transgression that somehow fused to take MAGA only in its kind of like ephemeral elite strata, right? And then you got like the bottom barrel white supremacist guys who are always kind of like hoping they could come back to the party. You got this elite strata that's like, yeah, come in, right? And I fully think that A, some of them are on the dime. B, some of them were always bad people who really we should have been a little bit more careful with. Think about like who benefits from the woke right running around being anti-Semitic and racist and white supremacist? The Democrats. How many of them are Democrats? How many of them were Bernie bros who only joined MAGA because they were pissed off about Hillary Clinton, which is perfectly good reason to be pissed off, but never really stopped being progressive, and they just started being progressive as right-wing tropes, because they don't. I mean, do Bernie bros have that committed of principles? Really? No, not really.
It's like funny. There was this whole fun party going on, and then everyone's making race jokes and having a good time, and then one guy makes a real racist comment, and you're like, dude, because he meant it.
And then some hot chick said based, and everybody went along with it, though, and that's kind of the problem.
So it's interesting. To move it into like what I think is the stuff we've been talking about with regard to like what's going on in the Jewish community, what's going on overseas with Israel, Gaza, Hamas. To what extent do you think Israel kind of broke MAGA, like the conversation around it? In other words, if this had never happened on October 7th and this war hadn't been going on, it seems to have been a conduit to allow for a lot of this Jew hatred, suspicion of Jews, especially on the right. On the left, we see where it comes from being against Israel, but on the right, it seems to have opened this well, and it's like to the left, the white person was the boogeyman. To the right, it's the Jews. And to what extent has that conversation, if that had never happened, would we be in this space right now with woke right?
I think some of them would have tried to push it, but it wouldn't have taken off as well. First of all, though, since you mentioned the Hamas, and we're naming names, our dear not friend at all, Elijah Schaefer, absolute crazy person, compared me. He said yesterday, me and Colin Wright, I don't know, he's a biologist. Yeah. So we're worse for America, more dangerous to America, he said, than Hamas. Because we're way worse than terrorists, because we're trying to maintain, I guess, liberal society or something. Anyway. Okay. To my credit, I'm giving myself credit on this one.
I see you woke, and I raise you your Hamas.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. What is the woke right? James Lindsay is Hamas. On October 7th, 2023, the terrible things happened. And on October 8th, I said I knew Israel was going to retaliate with force. And it has the capacity to retaliate with force. And I was like, here comes Gaza Floyd. That's what I called it, like the George Floyd. So I knew that the left was going to have this bananas, like Palestinian flag, explosion, which we saw. I didn't realize, actually, that the right was going to use the same exact thing until Candace came out, literally, I think it was like the next day or within a few days.
I'm aware.
And started pushing it, and with the whole Christ is King moniker attached to it as like her armor of God was, I said Christ is King, so you can't be mad at me that I'm like going after Israel and not just Israel in a really suspicious way. And so that's when I kind of said, all right, the right's going to go full blast on this too, and it's probably going to be being paid for by the same people on both sides. We know that the protests on the left, we know the energy's there, but we also know that the organizational principles and the money are not like these college kids are rich, but they're not spending their own money or mommy or daddy's money to have a protest over here at Columbia. they're going to get funded by, as we've seen now, proof has come out, these various Islamic nations and organizations. You got San Francisco State University literally had a Hamas terrorist come and speak recently and meet with students. And it's like, okay, so we know that there's like this funded thing on the left. Well, I was like, well, there's going to be a funded thing on the right. Of course there is, and this is going to be a huge drive. And like you said, the left makes it about Israel. They make it about settler colonialism and that, this was a Western imperial project that was inserted in. They do actually say that Jews made themselves into white people. But they don't hate Jews directly. There's an indirect hatred of Jews on the left.
But if they can frame Israel as white versus less white people,
that's right.
They can hate the Jews that are whites.
It's always by two steps, right? You have to go white then Jew or Israel then Jew.
Right.
But the right does the one step and the two step, and the one step is it's the Jews. There's all these conspiracy theories, all the way back to the protocols. Have you read the protocols? It's the Frankists. It's something.
Yeah.
They don't even have the sophistication to talk about actual, Jewish mystical heresies like Lurianic Kabbalah or something like that. They don't have the sophistication to talk about this. Yeah. It's the Frankists. It's the Khazarians or whatever, some nonsense.
And making this also, just like it's a Christian position to be anti-Israel. It's all of a sudden this tribal stance.
That's right.
Candace certainly did that.
That's when she hid behind Christ as King like a sword and a shield. And the thing is it's like, the tribalism, you derail me a little bit because it's so important that it's how they've done it. No, it's good. We're talking here. We're talking. But
that's what I think.
But they went after the Jews on they control the world conspiracy theories, all this rehashed crap from whether it's the Soviets in the 50s and 60s after Israel got established. The Soviets set up the PFLP, the Popular Front Communist, by the way, for the liberation of Palestine, which became the PLO, which mixed with the Muslim Brotherhood and became Hamas. It was a Soviet creation in the first place. I even debated a communist about this at one point, and he was like, oh, yeah, that was a Soviet creation. He didn't even try to challenge it. He's like, that was the communists, you're right. And then you got, all this Nazi tropes that have come back, and then, of course, we can go back to the Russian Tsar before the Bolsheviks took over with, trying to blame Jews for everything. We could even probably go back to, Marx when his essay, on the Jewish question or whatever, which how do you fix the Jewish problem in Germany? Marx wrote, well, you get rid of the Jews. That's how. It says you cure the Jew of Judaism and you cure the world of Jews.
Jewish erasure.
That's right. Yeah.
And then in one form or another, by death or by assimilation or
so Candace and all these characters come out and they trot out these new to their audience, rehashed, warmed over conspiracy theories from the last, say, 150 years about Jews, in some cases probably older as well. And the goal was exactly what you said, was to split MAGA on the issue of Israel, which has always been a very American conservatives for a long time have been very pro-Israel, at least since the 60s and probably before that. Well, the goal was to just break them right down the middle on that. And whether that's the Buchananite fringe with Tucker Carlson, whether that's whatever the hell Candace is.
Well, maybe I missed something, but why do they want to split it?
Because,
what's the benefit of splitting it?
Let me disillusion you for a minute, or disabuse you of an assumption. You think that these people, because they're on the right, want Trump to succeed. Okay. I think that they are funded by foreign governments and are deep state and are just assholes who never liked him in the first place, who want him to fail.
So Candace, for example, is trying to bring down Trump.
I think they're all trying to bring down Trump.
And you think they're funded by foreign governments?
I am positive that they have to be funded by foreign governments.
Go
Likely.
on.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have hard evidence. I don't have so everybody can clip that and make a funny clip. I don't have hard evidence that they're funded, but their behavior matches it. The circumstantial evidence is overwhelming, right? So we had the Wall Street Journal report in 2018. You think they stopped, right? That they had 250 MAGA influencers that they were paying to try to influence Trump policy in 2018. Do you think that as the stakes have gone up now, that they're going to have stopped doing that? Absolutely not.
They might be getting a plane.
But
it's
really cool. That's actually really cool that they figured out how to redo the Trojan horse story with a 747.
We'll see what he does.
I was telling Trump should take the plane, fly it back to America, make it into an October 7th museum.
But
big,
Wait.
beautiful
So
plane.
wait. Can we follow this though?
Whether it's I'm trying to figure out, is it organic or is it foreign? Because that's a big claim, you know. Like when you see the bot farms or things or like other things going on behind the scenes, kind of feels like it's mirroring what the woke right says about the Jews or whoever's behind things. Are you guilty of the same tactic by saying there's this bigger scheme behind everything in your accusation towards woke
Well,
right?
I mean, again, the Department of Justice caught Tenet Media taking $10 million of Russian money, allegedly.
Right. Yes.
And they was giving it to right-wing influencers to do what? It was specified. Do you remember what it was? It was to sow division within conservative politics. This is bread and butter stuff that these
That's what the
entities
Tenet thing
play.
uncovered. That's
what the
aim was.
original accusation was.
Right.
To quote Elie Leibovitz, a comedian, he said, like, what everyone thinks AIPAC is doing, Qatar is actually doing.
Yeah.
They're actually infiltrating universities and the government with money.
That's
and
all
to
proved as well.
And,
Like
Russian.
So one of the most naive things that's going on the right wing is to believe everybody's infiltrated but us. Somehow MAGA is pure, and if they're waving an American flag and wearing a red hat, that they're obviously on our team, which makes it really easy to be an infiltrator. Communists, Islamists, they all infiltrate. Fascists, I'm sure, also do infiltration, but it's a communist bread and butter is to infiltrate. I guarantee you that there are many people within the MAGA movement who are actually Democrats, who have been Democrats for a long time, who are taking advantage, like, especially these guys that have just appeared since 2021 and kind of become the voices.
I hear you saying it. The only thing that concerns me is it does sound, just to reiterate, awfully conspiratorial on your end. So I guess it's fighting fire with fire because they're claiming grand conspiracy, and that's one of the diagnoses of a woke right person. But when you're saying there's this alternative conspiracy, it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, but I mean, we already know that these entities are funding the crap out of influence operations.
Right.
We already know that they have experience buying MAGA.
It sounds more like
influencers.
geopolitical than conspiracy to me.
I just
Like,
know how.
we also know that
but the way
sometimes-
people hear it.
Yeah,
We
Yeah,
also know that
it
if you
feels
argue
the
with them
same.
just right on Twitter, they accidentally slip into simplified Chinese sometimes. So it's not just Muslims.
These
it's-
bots?
Yeah, CCP bots.
Can you?
I totally have argued with a woke right guy about something. No, he said something crazy positive about China. And I was like, why are you saying something crazy positive about China? And he's like, let me give you 5 reasons why China is so great. And then I was like,
Let me give you 5 reasons.
so I just
China's
said
so
something
great.
back to him and like, man, this is simplified Chinese.
He
And
typed it in an accent.
Yeah, he did. You wouldn't believe it. But no, he gave me like 5 reasons. And it's like
pretty wild.
I went and looked at his bio and it was like, you know, MAGA this and that. And then it was like China #1 or something. It was very like not well done. And so this is the thing. Some of these accounts, there are groups that are, you know, research groups that are tracking a lot of the extremism online. And you'll find that in their off time that they post in Russian. Instead of posting in English.
So let me ask you. So what's the danger here
Of what?
of
Splitting
these
MAGA?
factions? Yeah, of these factions on the right.
Well, Trump has.
As your-
Well, there's a few things. There are a couple big dangers. One is Trump has some hard work to do and some very controversial waters to navigate, and having a solid base of support under him when the more controversial stuff comes up is pretty important. It's a huge vulnerability if, say, 20% of MAGA is going to go rogue on him, or 15% of MAGA is going to go completely rogue on him at some point when he's least expecting it and needs the support. Secondly, you know, Trump won in 2024, but there are elections in the future too, right? Like 2026 is a very important
We'll see
election,
about
big
that.
election. Yeah.
The coalition, though, as it becomes more fragile and splits. And
That's
fractures.
right. So you're already watching people bail out. And of course, these guys, the response is, well, we didn't want them anyway. They weren't pure enough. It's like, guys, I hate to break it to these guys, but A, Trump did not win in a landslide. That is a mythology that they put forth. He won strongly. He didn't win in a landslide.
So strongly.
They're
Yeah.
two different things. And, you know, no shade to the president.
Yeah.
He had a great showing, better than expected. And he did sweep the swing states, but that's not a landslide. You got to get 60% to hit a landslide. That's the definition. And then the coalition that elected Trump has an awful lot of not MAGA in it.
Right.
Right? An awful lot of people who held their nose or came over for the first time and said, we've got to stop the Democrats. We've got to work together. This has to be about pro-America. There's a bunch of Maha guys that don't care one whit about MAGA, but they're like, Robert Kennedy, you know, and, you know, throwing their underwear on the stage because we know who they are. And it's like, women. And so it's like, those
got a good
people
body.
are already starting out
Great
with the whole
body.
like, I wish I didn't vote for him. What's going on? Why? Because they're seeing all this nasty stuff. So the other risk is that you undermine the capacity for Trump to maintain the coalition that brought the electoral success in the first place and be able to build on that coalition, to be able to kill it in 26 and then have a successor in 28 that takes the reins, because we're not solving this problem in 2 or 4 years.
So what do you say to people? Like, I've seen you out there, and it's like they're pointing the finger at you. James, you're the one splitting the coalition by putting everyone into this label.
Yeah, that's what people always do. Like if you had like a group of people, right, and a handful of them are like kind of a splinter group. Let's say that they're bad guys, right? They're Pied Pipers.
Yeah.
And they want to lead the whole group off into the wrong part of town or whatever or something. And then somebody points at them and says, hey, where are you going? We don't want to go that way, right? That's not what we're doing. What are they going to do? They're going to turn around and say, you're trying to split up the group. Everybody was already kind of going this way. So when you take the whole movement.
You're the buzzkill.
Yeah, that's right. When you have a splinter and you call out the splinter for dragging the whole operation using whether it's move the Overton window or nudge theory or whatever the idea is, when you're leading somebody off track, a movement off track, and somebody's like, that's not the way, their number one go-to move is to turn around and point at you and say, you're the one trying to divide us. And then you say, what are you going to do? You are in a sense, but you're not. You want that segment of the movement either to give up their radicalism and get back on the program, which is your main hope, and if they don't, it's like, I don't really want a bunch of anti-Semites, real anti-Semites. I don't mean people who make jokes about Jews, because some jokes about Jews are funny. I mean,
Fair enough. Totally.
I mean, it's true for everybody.
Yeah.
I made an article. I got in so much trouble a few years ago. I made an argument that we should have racial but not racist jokes, because they're funny and they navigate difference, and it's actually a way that people can
Racial.
racial but not racist. And we've all seen how funny they can be, and we all have this intuitive sense of when they go wrong. Well, we're not doing ourselves any favors by having outright white supremacists and outright fascists, like guys that when I was at the America Fest, and this wasn't America Fest stuff. That was off to, in the evening. I was at one of the bars or whatever, one of the parties, and some dudes from the Blaze got drunk, and they got all up in my face, like, why you got to call us woke right? And I'm like, because you're woke. And then they're like,
you got to call Jane Lindsay.
And they were like, the dude was like,
Lindsay Buckingham, what are you doing? Woke
Jimmy
right.
concepts.
Yeah.
Why can't you call it? One guy said, why can't you call us fascists? That sounds cooler. And I was like, that's why you're woke right. Like, it's not cool. It's like, you're woke right.
And it actually seems so interesting because I find that what happens is when you get like totalitarianism, it's just this weird observation I've had, and I'm not sure how grounded it is because I'm really not educated, but totalitarianism, out of that you get freedom. Like you come out of that with freedom, capitalism, and the wealth that creates. And then you get communism, which says, hey, we need some of that wealth. Let's distribute it. That belongs to us, the sense of entitlement.
Yeah.
And then out of communism, those failures don't lead back to capitalism. They lead to fascism.
That's right. Fascism is
And then out of fascism, again, you get break away from that. But I'm seeing this like weird pattern. It reminds me of when you learn about World War II history. It was that, that's what came out of it.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do is skip the fascist stage because fascism goes wrong bad, goes wrong quick, and when it goes wrong, you hand all the moral authority back to the left, and what you end up with is the kids these days call it is globo-homo. That's what you end up with.
What is globo-homo?
Well, it's a pun, right? It means two things at once. Obviously, global homogenization is the polite version, but we all know what
That's
the
like
other part
right-wing
is.
queer, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Global homogenization.
Yeah.
Explain that. No?
The whole world is going to be homogenized into the same set of values. It's going to be roughly over a few generations the same shade of brown. It's all going to have the same economic system.
The globalists. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly.
Well, okay. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I had this back to what you said about whether this is like other actors, foreign actors contributing to this, or whether it's organic.
The answer is both, by the way.
Yeah, so I think if it's foreign actors, then you got to investigate that and expose it for what it is. But let's just focus on, for argument's sake, to the extent that this is organic, because then it's super concerning. I see that what like Candace and other people have done is sort of play on the sort of post-traumatic stress and trauma of past entanglements that America's been involved in that didn't go right, the wrong diagnoses for the war on terror, like the war in Iraq, whereas by when you find the right diagnoses, like Iran and all these people say, I just don't want to fight it. It's like if you were fighting cancer by treating the wrong area over here, you're like, okay, that was bad. But then when you find the cancer, you don't just ignore it. Yeah. You treat it because we actually found it. It doesn't mean your misdiagnoses were wrong, but now it's like, don't diagnose anything anymore. Yeah. And they're hiding behind this argument of, I'm just against foreign aid. And I'm like, is that why you can't stop talking about Israel and the Jews, because you're against foreign aid? Yeah. And so there's a lot of things to hide behind that I think attract a lot of people organically to say, I don't want to be involved in any Ukraine, Israel, nothing. And especially while America feels like it's in decline and needs to be brought back, which is the MAGA spirit. So it does attract a lot of this organic stuff, which is very troubling. Plus the lack of a sort of maybe a Christian identity that's been lost.
Well, don't forget like the abuse we just went through with COVID and all the identity politics and everything else, right? The institutional collapse. The institutional collapse, so they can play in this. Yeah. So an organic feature is that people want cults. People who have narcissistic tendencies want cults. They want huge followings. They want those followings to support them, to reflect back upon them, to give them money, to give them accolades, to get them opportunities. And so if we want to stay in the total organic domain, you can just see, there's a character like Candace who sees maybe she's not particularly scrupulous. She sees the shot she can shoot. She sees a series of plays that she can make and that she can get a completely committed following. Because when you get somebody to follow you, if you say something right and people support you, and then you say something else right and they support you, and then you say something wrong, a bunch of them might leave. But if you say something wrong and people support you, boy, they're locked in. Because now they're like, they put their own pride on the line, their own sense on the line to defend you. So they were committed for reasons other than that you were right. They were committed because they were emotionally attached to you or something like that. So this is exactly what the cult leader is looking for.
And then there's no standards.
If you start driving it deeper and deeper and deeper into, taboo or no-go territory, then you have a bunch of people who are more or less stuck with you, right? And so they're going to have high loyalty, high commitment. And so there's a bunch of people who's probably saw this opportunity to shoot their shots and do that. Then you have people like Tucker Carlson. Do I think he's building a cult? The answer, maybe. I don't know how narcissistic he is. We can make some guesses. But Tucker Carlson, I do know, has a very specific belief about politics. And that belief about politics is that he is very strongly Buchananite, meaning Pat Buchanan, which means he's paleo-conservative, which means he thinks that for the last at least 60 years, the conservative movement has been doing the wrong thing. And so he has just a purely ideological motivation present. You don't have to name anybody trying to pay him. He doesn't even necessarily need it. He can be mad that the failures of the program up to, say, 2016 or 2020 did not generate a paleo-conservative with huge support as he had hoped. It generated Donald Trump instead. So Donald Trump, who's super pro-America, a lot of people joke that he's like a 90s Democrat in Republican clothes. It's a little bit more conservative now after especially the assassination attempt. And he's like clearly kind of found God with that, which, I mean, I get it. It's like literally a miracle, and I'm like struggling with that myself. But Tucker Carlson wanted...
you're like an atheist, that's right.
Yeah, he wanted a completely different Republican politics. And now he has his opportunity. I mean, people forget this. Back in 2019, Tucker Carlson came out in January, very scandalous. Look it up. It's not hidden secret knowledge. You can look it up and read about it. I did a podcast about it. Tucker Carlson came out and said that he would consider voting for Elizabeth Warren because he liked her economic ideas so much if she would ditch some of the identity politics stuff.
Yeah, and he did that.
Yeah, and he said that based on Elizabeth Warren putting something forth that was called the Accountable Capitalism Act, which was, when you hear those words, now we're all familiar with woke, you barf a little bit in your mouth, you're like, oh God, accountable capitalism, you know what it's going to be. Yes. It's going to be weird environmental policies, it's going to be ESG or some bull crap constraining free markets, but Tucker liked this a lot. And then Ben Shapiro comes out of the woodwork. So these feuds are old, right? Ben Shapiro comes off the top rope, actually, and he's like, Milton Friedman, right? And like just drops an elbow, throws out the whole full blast Milton Friedman argument, does a great job making the argument. And does Tucker Carlson shoot back at Ben Shapiro? No, J.D. Vance shoots back at at Ben Shapiro and says that's what actually Hillbilly Elegy was about, and Tucker's right. And they advocate for they are not capitalists.
No.
They want restricted capitalism. They say that they're philosophically something called distributist, which is it's a third way that comes from Pope Leo XIII, who we now have Pope Leo XIV, who's literally just come into his seat, adopting the image of Pope Leo XIII on purpose. These guys are distributists. They want the ideal of distributism is that the means of production are distributed out to the ends, right? So it's like the old English idea of like 3 acres and a cow for everybody. It would be the ideal society. The problem is how do you end up? What do you do with a company like Google, right? That's amassed a huge amount of resources.
But yeah,
well, you break it up. Is what you do.
That was when it was in the realm of economic populism and kind of part of the civil debate, and you could have those debates. Where it's come to now is like from a place that feels darker, and it feels like Tucker has this strategy of introducing confusion, talking out of both sides of his mouth. I'm not saying it's tied to anything Russian or anything like that, but this
you're very talented. Can you talk out of both sides of your mouth at the same time?
Well, I love that. I actually hate talking out of both sides of the mouth, but I would prefer to.
Yeah.
See what I just said? Yeah. A whole lot of nothing. But it introduces so much confusion into the discourse, and then him hyper-focusing on the flaws of Israel, interviewing the one Palestinian in the West Bank, talking about how it's become de-Christianized and ignoring all the de-Christianization of the rest of the Middle East and the West Bank under Palestinian Authority. It's a strange selective condemnation that starts to happen. And I guess if we're going to believe that stuff is organic, and trying to figure out what Tucker's angle is one thing, I just wanted to pose the question of, once you establish that it could be organic, tactics versus substance. I agree with you on a lot of the substance, but tactically, this obsession with trying to label something hateful or anti-Semitic, isn't it ultimately self-defeating and could be read as woke or censorship or canceling to try to put people in this box and do it that way?
That's weak words, though. Could be read as like that puts the ball in their court. The question it really has to be, is it? I actually, when I talk about anti-Semitism, and I've used the word a bunch of times so far, and you got Candace out there beating the drum and other people out beating the drum. The left has racism, the right has anti-Semitism. It's all just to try to shut you up. They're the ones who are woke. So I think that's kind of what you're talking into. I try to be really actually clear, and not all Jews that I'm friends with love this, right? But I try to talk about being anti-Israel as a state as one thing, or even just critical. And I think everybody should be critical of every state, frankly, in a lot of ways. So that's fair and on the table. And Israel didn't do great with COVID, and they've got a very left-wing government right now. There are a lot of things to put on the table there. And as an intelligence service, the Mossad does things like the CIA and MI6 and MI5 that you have to be kind of like, whose interest is that really in, right? So that's we'll lump that under something that we could call, anti-Israel criticism, but that's a little separate from the Mossad. But okay, so that's talking about the state, right? And then you have anti-Jew, right? That's totally different.
Sure.
Right. And I'm not using the word anti-Semitism here on purpose. Then there's anti-Zionism, which is this idea about whether or not there should be the state of Israel and who should live there or move there under different ways that it's organized. And then you have a fourth category, which is anti-Semitism, which I try to reserve for the conspiracy theory that the Jews control everything.
How is that different than anti-Jew?
Because anti-Jew is like, you're a Jew, I don't like you. Anti-Semitism is like, your people have space lasers.
Oh, it's more about like it's not all Jews. It's not Jews and regular old folk. It's like, these people that are powerful. Which is, by the way, how the average Nazi thought about Jews too. The Jews that he knew were like, they're fine, right? They're okay. But it's the Jews out there.
It's a placeholder for whatever's wrong with our society.
Well, yeah, it's like the ultimate conspiracy theory, and you can always kind of link it back to this a highly successful minority group that refuses to assimilate and sees its brothers through its religion and ethnicity at the same time anywhere in the world as a single national entity. Like the nation of Israel can be in total diaspora. You can have it completely spread around the world. So anti-Jew is literally like Jewish either religion or ethnic hatred, whereas anti-Semitism I try to reserve for the conspiracy theory.
Interesting.
So if you, like Ian Carroll has no problem with Jews, or so he says, as individual people, or maybe even as a people overall. He says this repeatedly. I feel no reason to accuse him of more than what he's willing to say, but he completely pushes not just anti-Israel against the state, which is what he hides behind, but anti-Semitism. That it's a huge conspiracy that the Jews have infiltrated our Congress and control everything from behind the scenes. That's different. That's a different thing. And it's hard to talk about these things without kind of breaking it down in a way. All those things overlap in weird ways, and it's complicated and ugly, but the fact is that you can see that they're four different kind of mentalities.
And it requires that discernment. I think one of the things I was alluding to is that for too long, like racism, anti-Semitism got thrown around at anybody and everybody. It's like if Richard Spencer, Louis Farrakhan,
Me.
you
in 21, I got massively
Rogan are
accused.
the same thing, that it means nothing.
Yeah, I got massively accused because I said that there was a rise of right-wing anti-Semitism happening then. I saw the woke right at the end of January of 21 for the first time. And in February 21, I did a tweet like the 7th, first week, and I said, tweet, you try to cram everything into 280 characters so it doesn't work. And I was like, well, you got your kind of like run-of-the-mill, everybody knows it and hates it, anti-Semitism. You got this rising anti-Semitism on the left from CRT and post-colonial theory, and there's rising anti-Semitism on the right. And what I said is that they're seeing the behaviors of progressive Jews and the Frankfurt School and so on. And it's like, oh, you've blamed Jews for anti-Semitism. You're anti-Semitic. And I'm like, I didn't even know that was a rule.
I'm trying to help you.
I'm literally telling you what people that I just talked to who said very scary things about Jews, why they said them.
Right.
And it's like,
nothing Dennis Prager hasn't said too. It's like there are Jews that have been responsible.
Yeah, no hat, no hat. So
interesting. Well, because there was, you said it post October 7th, right? So I think,
no, that was January or February of 2021.
Oh, I see. Well,
and so some people went bananas, and everything got ugly, and then everything got fine.
We almost lost James Lindsay.
We did over histrionics, as it boils down to, but it's fine. It's fine. But you're right. To your point, the term anti-Semitism was getting thrown around, and the ADL isn't doing anybody any favors. In fact, they're like everybody's worst enemy. By throwing this term around where it doesn't apply in ways that just so happen where Candace is gaining ground, she has firm ground to stand on. You throw the word around in ways that are not accurate, and it doesn't just look woke, it is woke in a very real way. And it doesn't do anybody any favors. And obviously Candace is able to exploit this, and then Ian and the rest of them are able to exploit it. We're just asking questions. Why aren't we allowed to ask these questions?
And it makes it that much harder to call that out.
And it's like a
cry wolf thing. You're like,
I would love to ask some questions about what in the world Netanyahu was doing during COVID. Like, arguably you have New Zealand that had worse policies, Victoria within Australia, but not all of Australia, that had stricter policies. It's like very few places in the world went harder core than Israel. And like, why? What are we going to do about that?
Well, in a post-October 7th world, it's just more radioactive because Israel
course.
is in this survival mode. So it's like someone getting the crap kicked out of them and get invaded, and they're like, wait a minute, I got to talk about your tax evasion.
Yeah. By the way, what was with the needles? No, I get that. And this is this weird thing. Like, post-October 7th, the whole conversation gets this weird inflammation to it. Like, you can't criticize, and that's not even in the war effort, which I'm pretty well convinced that Israel's run about the cleanest war that you can run, especially against an opponent that believes in human shields and children as shields and things like that.
And he's back in.
Yeah. And so it's not just that though. It's like, all of a sudden, because there's this war, there's the, don't open up a gap to where somebody can criticize the whole program or whatever. And that makes it very hard. So my friend came up with this idea that the woke right, he said, does, that is he called it, it's so brilliant, recruiting on the third rail. So when I said that there are these people noticing progressive Jews and becoming anti-Semitic, I got accused of stepping on a third rail, which was that that Jews are causing anti-Semitism. You're not allowed to talk in that way, even though obviously I had no idea that was a problem, and I was just trying to relate what I had heard. Okay, so there are these areas third rail areas, which, of course, you guys are in New York, you understand, but not everybody's in New York. It's the third rail on the subway, which is full of electricity, and you'll die if you touch it. So nobody touches the third rail. Nobody goes near the third rail. So what these guys do is they set up shop on the third rail. And they're like, hey, let's just ask some questions about Israel, or hey, let's just, look at the USS Liberty, or whatever it happens to be. Let's blame the Jews. Let's go into some white supremacy or whatever. And then with the woman who just called the little kid the N-word, right? Like, we all know that there are absolutely ridiculous things under woke stricture, like that communications professor at USC who was explaining, here we're going to get canceled, he was explaining that in Mandarin Chinese, they don't say when they're trying to think. There's a word that literally translates to inside thing, like the thing in my head. And so you might say like Tashra nega, nega, nega. And he's a communications professor. Nega is the word. And you hear what it sounds like. And this communications professor is like, if you're dealing with people who speak Mandarin, they're going to say this. And it's not a racial slur. So then the wokies went bananas on him. He gets fired or something from USC because of this, because he was too close to a racial slur. We all know that's stupid. We also know that if you're going to read something straight out of Huckleberry Finn, we know the words in there. We know we shouldn't take the word out because that's where it was written. And if you read the passage there, that's called mentioning the word, not using the word. So there are these stupid rules. Nobody's allowed to do these things. But if you make the rules stupid, you create a third rail.
Well, it's like the
you
Sam
can beat me out, beep me out, and make my point. That's the
Sam
whole
Harris said it's not Voldemort. The word is not Voldemort. By saying it, we bring racism back.
It is a third rail. And so what then they do is they step into that space, and they're like, "We'll say it, and we know you can say it sometimes, and let's just say it together." Or let's just ask some questions about these Jewish conspiracies from the Nazis that nobody's talked about in 80 years. And they because nobody will go into the space to talk about it responsibly. Like there's some real stuff here.
Let's take the whole red pill bottle. Like that's
the thing is rather than taking the one, it's like chug the bottle, right?
No, but because there's not sophisticated discourse, it leaves an opportunity for people to have dumb discourse.
There's no sophisticated, uncomfortable discourse, where sometimes the people who step into the space will get accused of messing up when they didn't, and will mess up sometimes and cross a line where there should be some give and take. So what happens is you get Jake Shields in there like a caveman, getting kicked 3 times in the head and then screaming the N-word or something, or screaming about the Jews or whatever you want. And people are like, cancel him. And then he's like, they're canceling me. And they're like, make him a hero. And that's recruiting in this third rail space.
So is the antidote to this more sophisticated conversation?
It's being willing to remember, like putting heavy duty taboos on speech is going to create these situations, right? And so where the conversation is about, you brought up with anti-Semitism, there are legitimate questions about each of those within each of those 4 legitimate conversations, not questions, within each of those 4 areas that people who are mature and willing to have discourses and willing to we barely know each other, right? I'm going to say something and I don't know if you're going to be okay with it, and you're going to be like, James, there's a little much. And I'm going to be like, I didn't mean it, right? And I'm going to be like, I didn't mean it. And you're going to be like, it's cool. We're trying to find where it is, right? And if you can't have that, then what you're going to end up with is these guys screaming in the space, and Tucker saying, you're just not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think is a signature difference in woke left and woke right, because we're trying to find these parallels, and I think you're making a good case for it. Sometimes it's very technical, and I think we should try to boil down what the most simple explanations are, but the parallels are there. But one of the differences is, like, the signature on the woke left was that they were not willing to engage in civil discourse.
No.
It was a dogma by which you had to agree, and on the woke right, you have a debate me bro culture. On the woke left, it was like, agree with me, ma'am. Like, it was a very different kind of culture. And so on the woke right, one of the signature differences that I think gives me a little bit of optimism is that their whole premise is, we just want to have these conversations. We want to be able to talk and have these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable. And I always go back to Jordan Peterson's line of, in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive.
Yeah,
and so I want to try to apply that standard consistently. The problem is when there's these nefarious actors in there who want to exploit that conversation.
That's right.
But at least you can take them up on the offer. So the question is, what's wrong with the tactic of engaging, and where's that threshold?
Nothing's wrong with engaging.
So, like, specifically, should Joe Rogan have spoken to Ian Carroll?
Yeah, or a Daryl Cooper. Like, that's where people sort of lose their
So
minds. So
the thing
question
is, like, there are different ways to have these conversations. I don't have a problem with these people coming on and like Daryl Cooper, whether we like it or not, Ian Carroll, whether we like it or not, are something of phenomena. Like, they have big followings. It's perfectly natural. Joe Rogan, when he was asked, why did you talk to Ian Carroll, he said, I wanted to probe the conspiracy theory mindset. But he didn't do that, right? That's not what happened. It's like where Tucker Carlson interviewed Vladimir Putin, and that's fine. He's a world leader, right? But is that really all that happened? Or did a KGB agent sit there and roll an American journalist in front of a audience that he's trying to win over, which is the, MAGA conservatives? Or more importantly, when Tucker Carlson interviewed somebody like Andrew Isker, the Christian nationalist guy from a few weeks ago, or when he interviewed a much less known but much more important name, Charles Haywood, back a few years ago, 21 or 2, I think 22, he interviewed Charles Haywood. Okay. Charles Haywood has this crazy manifesto out there. Charles Haywood has lots and lots of money. Charles Haywood funds a lot of the things that are happening on the woke right. He is a Francoist by his own description. He is his manifesto is so insanely radical. So Tucker talks to him about the manifesto. He talks to him about the paragraph before the crazy paragraph. Whoop, and he pulls up hard and goes somewhere
rather
else.
uncritically.
He talks to him about, oh, you have written such interesting things about the Spanish Civil War. Tell us. Doesn't come out ever and say, but you also support Franco. What's that about? Right? So it's like this invitation for people to go find out more about his work without the challenging question. So Joe should have asked some harder questions.
But that's the fair criticism. Not, you shouldn't have had him on and he shouldn't be spoken to. It's, if you have him on, or what I would have done is, people are going after the association or the fact that he had him on, not what he didn't or did not say.
That's right.
And that's the problem.
If you want to have them on, there is and it's true for anybody you have on who has, divergent views, really anybody, period. You've got to press them a little bit, right? And I get it. Joe's like the UFO and the Bigfoot guy and the whatever. You don't really have, you can press those guys some, but it's like, what are the consequences of Sasquatch? Like, not that much. But what are the consequences of the Jews orchestrated 9/11? Kind of big.
Yeah.
Right? So you've got to, there's a little bit higher responsibility for dealing with that conversation. So it's, yes, in fact, I'm enthusiastic about having these guys brought in to be talked to in public, but I also want them talked to in public by people who know what they're doing, right, and are willing to. They're not softballing the whole thing. If you're gonna present a thesis that is highly objectionable and highly polarizing, it's one thing if it's a different conversation. You want to talk about entrepreneurial tips for increasing your business. Say whatever you want. But if you're going to bring up something contentious that involves, possibly the safety of large numbers of people in your society, you've got some harder questions you've got to ask.
What happens now if Joe Rogan or anyone else who has a big platform simply doesn't understand the consequences of what they're doing? You can hope he learns something about them. You can hope he cares. It's ultimately his show. That's still true. Yeah. But the thing is like people are going to answer it too, right? So even if it's even if it's softball interviews, the reaction has to come. That's part of the debate and the dialogue. I think it's crucial.
Do you think, though, what's your take when I'm watching on Twitter and sort of the reactions to, say, Dave Smith, Douglas Murray? There's a part of me that feels like sometimes these conversations, in their criticism and reaction to it, simply just push the echo chambers further apart because they come across as you shouldn't be talking to these people rather than here's the correct ideas to refute the bad ideas or incorrect ideas that I heard. And we're attacking the messenger and not the message. And it seems to be much more constructive to be focusing on which ideas are not woke or unwoke, but which ideas are correct and not correct.
Sure,
if we're not scared of that.
Well, ideas themselves aren't woke, by the way. Woke is a way of viewing the world, right? And so it's a way of interpreting ideas. And it's the way of interpreting that it is that there's literally a power-driven conspiracy of a group of people who are trying to keep all other identities out of the center of power. And so it's not, there is no woke idea, right?
Right. But when they hear this, my question is like when the critique is processed as you shouldn't be talking to so-and-so, they hear gatekeeper,
Yeah.
being scared of ideas, rather than the discernment that we're talking about, which is, look, Joe had somebody on and maybe it was not as critical as we would have liked, but then the antidote isn't shaming, labeling, now you're all fitting into this box, now you're woke right, you're anti-Semitic, you're this, rather than, okay, Daryl Cooper said some things, let's unpack what was, and maybe not demand Joe has him on, but have him on yourself, as like we're big boys here, we can do that.
So there are two complications or caveats that have to be added, and I didn't say exceptions. One of these is that there are people who are propagandists. And like you said, they just want to have the conversation, because what they want to do is have the chance, as Ian Carroll admitted, talking to Amru Footle or whatever his name is.
Gaines,
Myron Gaines. He said it very clearly on his podcast that he was trying to take Joe and Joe's audience down a primrose path. So there are propagandists. So you have to be, I mean, frankly, Joe can do what he wants, but you've got to be sophisticated to deal with a deliberate propagandist, because their goal is to mislead your audience bit by bit. And as Ian said himself, to take them as far as they're able to go, and to measure that and then try to take them further the next opportunity that you get. So propagandists are one trick. And then the Debate Me bros have another dimension to them, which is that they'll try to drag you onto a show for an hour, and they're going to hit you with these gotchas. Don't you think the founding fathers were woke then because they were white supremacists? A lot of them were. It doesn't make them woke, right? And maybe you haven't heard that stupid challenge yet, and you don't know what to say, and you stumble on it a little bit, and you don't say something very clear like, no, the founding fathers rejected idealism and romanticism from the French Revolution and German philosophical politics, and they set up a divided powers system that tries to exclude us from a certain militant faction taking all the power. So they're anti-woke, right? If you can't answer that, though, what they're looking for is, you say, I said that on Twitter this way, you go on, they hit you with 80 gotchas, you get 79 of them that you hit out of the park, home run, and you mess up on one. Guess what clip they're going to play? The goal was to get the clip of you screwing up so that they can then go and declare victory and dance on your grave, knowing exactly, this is an Antifa tactic, by the way, knowing exactly that that's what 90% of people are going to see and nothing else of the whole thing. They're going to see Ami screwed up, right? And so this is extremely Antifa. This is where Antifa would come out and stand there on the street and yell and provoke and provoke and provoke and throw things at you until finally somebody slapped one of them, and that's what they get on camera.
Right.
And then that's what's on. That's what's on news. That's right. Violent Proud Boys punch Antifa guy who antagonized him for 2.5 hours before that or whatever, right? Talking about his mother till he finally lost his marbles and did something dumb, and they put those 7 seconds on TV. That's a technique. It's written about in their training manuals. It's called mid-level violence. It's literally got a name. So the Debate Me bros have a tactic of hitting you with a bunch of bitch moves that you don't know how to respond to. Were the founding fathers woke right, or whatever.
Is it like an Andrew Wilson tactic or something like that? Is he a Debate Me bro?
I have no idea. I don't even know who that is.
Oh, I think I'm getting his name right. All right, anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't. Apparently, it doesn't matter. Okay. And so, but the goal is to get the ugly clip, and this is why I compared the Groypers particularly, but in further behaviors. But this is why they are comparable in a lot of ways in their behavior to Antifa. And if Antifa doesn't count as woke, by the way, back when Andy Ngo was writing his book, he and I had a long conversation because he wanted to understand. This was where the state of that conversation was back then. Does Antifa count as woke or not? Because they're not like exactly the theories, right? They're different somehow. Their ideas are different, but they bleed in with it, and they kind of believe a lot of it, and they do the same stuff, and they support each other. So this is where you get like Tim Pool running on his mouth. Oh, Candace Owens and Ian Carroll don't have any shared belief except hating Israel for no reason. And and then you throw in, Will Chamberlain or whoever from NatCon. How can James Lindsay call these people all woke if they have such different beliefs? Well, how can you have a purple-haired gender goblin and then this CRT race person who wants nothing to do with the gender stuff at all, and then you have a fat activist over here who doesn't care about either of those, and then you have Antifa who's out in Black Bloc breaking something, and how can you call? Or then you have an environmentalist in Extinction Rebellion. How do you call all of them woke? Well, we know how you can call them all woke because they have the same general mindset, the same general tactics, the same critical theory and activism approach to taking on society. And it doesn't matter how it manifests. Is the conspiracy the post-war liberal consensus? Is the conspiracy the neocons, had too soft of a politics? That's the NatCon view. Is it the Jews control everything? Is it that the white heritage Americans have to reclaim their former glory?
So different villains, different characters, same framework, same exact setup.
Exactly. So it's like an operating system running different programs. So the CRT people have, you know, the whiteness is the problem program. The Marxists have the capitalism is the program, part is the program. And the program for, you know, a lot of the woke right guys is that there's a post-war hegemony that has excluded true conservatives, who most of whom happen to hate Israel.
Problem is, every single operating system hates the Jews.
Except, actually, liberalism.
And here we are. You mean the actual ideology of liberalism, like individualism?
That's the key right there.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what your hat is or not. That's important to you, and we can get
It's
to
called
know
the yarmulke, James. Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Kippa.
Kippa, yeah. Kippa. So Tennessee of you. How's that Kippa?
How's it Kippa?
Yeah. You're saying individualism is the antidote. What I mean to say is...
No, it's seeing each other as individuals, right? Like, okay, so you're Jewish, that makes you have, you know, that's very important to you, and I can respect that. I can actually choose not to, whatever, and we get to navigate our relationships accordingly, right? But at the end of the day, let's say that I'm considering to hire you for my, you know, my redneck factory down in Tennessee. I have to evaluate you as a person. I have to evaluate you as a person. Why do I care what your religion happens to be, what your skin color is? Whether maybe it's true. I don't know. If it's true, perhaps it's empirically true that different races have different IQs, right? Maybe we could even say, well, because of adoption studies, we kind of know that there might be reasons why that is the case, right? Or whatever. And the Jews have the highest ones. Okay, so
Ashkenazi Jews.
Yeah,
too.
that's right. 107.
Of course, you know the number.
Yeah.
But,
and the Han Chinese 104. Deal with it.
that's why those bot farms are good.
But the thing is, like,
question.
even if all of that's true, right? And let's say you're West Virginian, they have IQ 91 on average, and I bring you to work in my redneck factory. I still have to sit down and interview you, whether you're West Virginian or not, and find out if you individually are competent.
Right.
And that right there takes the whole stupid game off the table. And guess what? People who play that way have literally no reason to hate Jews or blacks or anybody else.
Right.
I got more of like a wrap-up question. Are we heading
almost
towards
there? Almost there. I wanted to just like the difference you were making about Antifa and that in provoking a sort of Trump supporter into a violent action versus the Debate Me Bros provocations is the Debate Me Bros are having conversations and they're trying to get you.
You're 100%
So it's
right.
a little bit more preferable, and it also
It's way more preferable.
If that's ascendant in the culture, it is important on the person to know what kind of combat they're going into and have grounded principles and arguments to withstand that, even though it's manipulative, if you're going to engage in it. The question is this whole Groyper Debate Me Bro culture to try to get you in there, is that something you don't engage with? Is it something you have alternative conversations around them? Do you take them head on? Tactics-wise, substance-wise, like I said, like,
no,
I
it's
totally hear you.
complicated.
But tactically, you don't want to say, you don't want to ignore the problem.
Nope.
You don't want to grant the problem legitimacy if they're nefarious actors, but then at what point? I mean, I would have the conversations critically at certain points, but it's hard to say because having a conversation with someone not in good faith, to me, is just a total waste of time.
Total waste of time. It's worse than a waste of time, yeah.
So I'm discerning, and I'm discerning when I make jokes about people, too. If I'm doing funny videos or whatever, if I'm going to call someone for being a real anti-Semite explicitly, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Versus other people who I think maybe are engageable and worth debunking.
Yeah, of course.
You know?
Yeah.
So where do you draw that line?
I mean, those are similar. For me, that is the line. Do I have a reasonable expectation that you're engaging in good faith? And actually, a good test of whether or not somebody's engaging in good faith is whether or not they can actually repeat your view back to you before the debate. Can you actually articulate what I think in a way that's you don't have to get it perfect, but what I recognize it as, you know, in the ballpark. And so that person's more likely to be willing to talk in good faith. Another good test is to actually say no. And watch and see if they flip out. They weren't interested in a good faith debate if they just completely flip out when you say no, right? And so, or if you get swarmed, like one of my policies for sure is if somebody says you need to debate so and so, and I'm like, don't even get around to answering yet, and it's like, why won't you debate whoever? Like,
they're trying to get you into something.
Nope.
Narcissism on mass.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of things there, and sometimes, like, honestly, it is just the rough and tumble, the give and take. Nobody has to do anything perfect. Right. So you make your best judgment. You debate who you want to debate. I will point out though that in the '80s, the people that we would have called woke backtracking. Obviously, we didn't use the word until like 2019. But if we backtrack, to that mentality. It was primarily feminists. We backtrack to the feminists in the 1980s. They primarily wanted to have debates. They primarily wanted to do law. They did a lot of lawfare. And they were not out in the street provoking street violence. They did that in the 60s, and they got their asses handed to them. And that all went away. They all went underground starting in the early 70s, and they didn't reemerge with the street stuff until the 2010s. And so that is the violent stuff is a marker of having enough power and control to where they are pretty sure they can get away with it. Right? So right now, the woke right knows that if they try to do the violent stuff, that the cops are going to bust them up. So they're not going to have the advantages that Antifa had in Portland and Seattle, pretty much anywhere. And so they're not going to do that.
They're
So
not averse to it, but they're just not there yet. It's incremental.
Again, you read the history of the Nazis. They were exactly the same way. The violence didn't even start until, there were a couple of incidences before 1933, but it really didn't start until you get all the way up into, 33 to 36.
Right. I guess for me right now at this moment where there's this sort of everybody's fighting for this movable middle who could fall prey to some of these bad arguments. Maybe instead of trying to see who fits a label or trying to label someone, just make better arguments and therefore explain why not just they're woke right or they're anti-Semitic or they're racist, but they're also wrong.
Yeah, well,
and so
of course.
When a movable middle sees them and then they hear them saying, well, they're this. We're like, okay. Or they're this. They're hateful. They're this. As opposed to, here's why they're wrong. And sometimes a little nudge like that is just enough to be like, oh, yeah, that's a really stupid idea. And it becomes cringe.
Yeah, of course. Right now they're all out. The woke right guys are all out trying to defend Karl Marx, and it's like they're totally having a 2 + 2 = 5 kind of moment. And so, you wouldn't think that conservatives, nominal conservatives or right wingers, would be out saying, "Well, Karl Marx was actually a great writer. He wouldn't have been so persuasive if he wasn't so great." And the fact was, he wasn't persuasive. Actually, he had a little bit of support up and through about 1870 something, when the Paris Commune happened, and it kind of had a little flare up after that, and it all kind of died out until a certain cult called the Bolsheviks in Russia picked it up in 1917 and made it a world force. So all of a sudden, everybody had to pay attention to Karl Marx for the first time in 40 years. And so it wasn't particularly captivating or popular, but they're out and defending him. And so, no,
they
I
tried
hear
to
you,
erase their Jewish identity, people. That was the point.
And so I actually, believe it or not, people don't like this because I sometimes just say woke right or you are woke right, but that's just being sloppy in internet talk. The fact is, woke is a way of viewing the world, right? And so we all know you can view the world a little bit that way or a lot that way. We've seen it with the left. Like somebody out there probably has a sister who believes some of the stupid gender stuff, but doesn't really get on with a lot of the other part and hasn't cut off the family, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
You can be a little woke. You can have dipped in a little bit. But if you make it about whether a person is woke or not, rather than have they adopted a woke perspective on this issue, which I think is actually important. You're not labeling a person. Right? I can say colloquially or shorthand Tucker Carlson's woke right, but what I mean is Tucker Carlson has adopted a woke perspective where outsider knowledge is more valuable than established knowledge.
And on Twitter, that doesn't always come through because we're speaking shorthand, but I think that's just understood.
Plus it's also just like the literally it's like the slap you in the face and walk off platform. It's
the road rage comment section group chat.
And frankly, a lot of people get mad at me because I make a lot of glib comments on there, but it's like I write about 1 million words a year. Between writing and podcasting, I'm writing about 1 million words a year. Twitter is like I'm sitting there in an armchair with my phone on my lap, screwing off. I'm not giving some random dude who asked a good question, totally legit, with 400 followers, a dissertation. I just don't have time or energy for it. I get thousands of them a day.
Right. Yeah.
I got like a 10,000-foot question. Just bring it back for a second. I mean, hearing you guys talk about this, I'm involved in the world, and I'm even a little bit lost. But hearing how nuanced and varied the right is right now. It reminds me of a writer, James Pogue, that I really like, who I think he termed the coin the new right, but he kind of discovered in 2021 how much vibrancy there was on the right, and he predicted, I think Trump might win because of all the energy and all the ideas on the right. If you're talking to a boomer who reads the New York Times and watches CNN, they would just think the right wing loves Trump and they just want a fascist. How do you explain in one or two sentences to a boomer who reads the New York Times what's going on right now on the right and where all of this can lead in a way that it might affect them in a negative way.
Yeah, okay, that's actually not as hard as it sounds. What a lot of guys, boomer reading the New York Times, will assume he's slightly left or whatever, center.
He is
Yeah,
left.
okay.
Yeah. They voted for Kamala.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, basically, MAGA overall is slightly heavily populist, but it is a very mainstream Americanist movement that skews conservative, right? It's diverse. It's a big coalition. It's very welcoming. If you go to their things and you're open-minded and don't call anybody names, you're going to find that they're extremely welcoming, happy to talk to you about almost anything, very open, genuinely welcoming of just about everybody. And then there is just like has happened in the Democrats over the last 10 years, there's a very radical group that wants to do a very radical politics that is, in most respects, separate from that mainstream MAGA thing, like it or hate it, and that it is radical in the same way that the far left was radical over the last decade. And so you see the identity politics, and especially the identity politics, and you see it's just that they point in the opposite direction. Instead of pro-minorities is pro-white, or instead of anti-Christian is pro-Christian. And it's all the same kind of energy, but it's a really small group, and it's unfortunately very influential and kind of intertwined. But there's actually also no reason to believe, at present at least, that Donald Trump goes along with that. He very much seems not to, as a matter of fact, and his record kind of has shown that in most respects. It's a little questionable when we get into the economic side, but that's a complicated discussion.
And what happens if that side grows so much that it takes over the whole party?
First of all, I would just say that they won't. Mainstream MAGA is not on board with most of the stuff they believe, and the only reason that they've been so successful is mainstream MAGA either doesn't know what's happening or isn't that powerful compared to their influencers, right? And but if it were to grow to grab the power base of the movement, then the movement will act very badly for as long as that can last, which my guess would be 18 to 24 months. It will be very ugly. It will be rejected by the American people, and our boomer friend will be very happy because it means the Democrats are going to win elections.
So they're going to support the woke right because they and you said to me even before we started that it's their goal, the Groypers, the woke right, to destroy MAGA.
That's my opinion,
and have the Democrats win. But right. Why would they want that as an alternative?
Well, they like being in opposition. Maybe they're actually plants in some cases or many cases. Because, I mean, Nick Fuentes' stuff makes way more sense when you're fighting against this huge, evil, awful power thing, if it's like a grift for him. Plus, it's also just the resentful petulance.
Yeah.
Like Trump isn't one of them. They've always been on the outside. Well, we'll show you. It's what Peterson said. Maybe you can do the voice.
Well, if you ask me, I'll do it. I know you just spoke for a while, but maybe a little taste. So that's what I would say.
It's like anything based on resentment is bad news.
That's what it is. I mean, it's such a loserish, resentful, bitter, envious posture and culture that I can't see people, in the American people, getting on board with it. It's very anti that spirit,
Yeah.
So you're optimistic?
I'm 50-50 right now. What's funny is
cautiously optimistic.
Before this radicalism, if we don't want to call it woke, but I think woke is the best word, before it blew up on the right, I was extremely optimistic. I saw us like passing peak woke left. I saw that starting to fade. I saw the coalition coming together that would be able to change circumstances in, positions of power. I saw a revival of American spirit, and I was I'm usually the most optimistic person in most rooms I spoke in. But now, it's more up in the air.
It's weird that the mainstream conservatives don't see how just like, maybe they do, but how unpatriotic, how anti-American, anti-Western, anti-Israel, anti-military it all is, which is strange. There's an old clip of Tucker Carlson speaking about Pat Buchanan. It's pretty crazy. It's Tucker versus Tucker.
I've seen that.
And you're like, what is going on here? So the diagnoses or to figure out the motivations is different depending on who you're talking about, whether it's woke right or woke right adjacent. But I guess we'll have to see where it all lands and be cautiously optimistic. James Lindsay, can't wait to get a tour of the Redneck Factory. And thank you for joining us here on Ami's House. I'm hoping we simplified the conversation, not as complex and meta as you with Peterson.
Jordan, my gosh.
But, you know, I mean, it really got out there. You know, it's the burning bush, the Bush administration, and the meta-Marxist neo-anthropomorphological literature is clear on this.
So,
it sure is.
on that note, ladies and gentlemen, James Lindsay,
Thank you, James.
thank you so
guys.
much.
Should we sing Hatikva to...
He's back in with the Jews.